Okay, here we have the original first job that you created for your very first job. Mine's open, just showing you what I have for loop 2. You have a job that is similarly named that you would have submitted. So what we want to do is have this job open. We're going to create a copy of this job, and then we're going to make some changes to it. So the first thing we want to do to make a copy is we actually want to create a new job. So I'm going to go up here to Job, and I'm going to select New Job. And I'm going to have to enter a name for the new job. I'm going to call this First Job and with Displays as my title. And I'll give it a comment of Add Displays and UDACT. So I'm creating a new job, but what I want to do is make sure that I click on the Copy Current Job box at the bottom right hand corner. What this will do, it will create a copy of the job that is currently open, which is this job 801 first job in my database. It will create a copy of that, but name it as First Job with Displays. So once I've got the job that I want to copy open and I create a new job like I'm doing, as long as I check this box and click OK, I now have created a new job that's based upon a copy of the previous job. You can now see that it's job 10 and the job name is First Job with Displays and the version is Add Displays with UDACT. So you'll notice it's the same job. It's exactly the same. It's a direct copy. So I wanted to do this so that I can move ahead by adding certain things to this. This job can be done without a security key also. We need a security key to add CPUs or additional nodes, but to add displays we do not need a security key. So this is your second job, if you will, but we will be doing it with adding displays to the first job. So to add displays or additional display adder, we go to our main display. The main display is the LCD display that's on the main control panel, and it provides us a port to add additional display adder modules. And the way we add displays is once we've got main display highlighted, we can go to Insert and select Add a Display Adder. The other way to do it is to just right-click on the main display and we get the same dialog box. So I'm going to click on Add Display Adder, and it opens up the dialog box for Add Select Adder Type. So we have Select Adder Type, we have these options to select from, and we can select which header to put them on. The main display on a panel only has one header, header 1, so any displays that we're going to add can only be added to that one header, and that's the limitation. However, if we had an LCD annunciator connected to the panel, we would be able to have access to 3 headers, and we would be able to add display adders to any of those 3 headers. So we only have the option of header 1, and the options we have are 48 LED adder, which is a RAX 1048. It's the RAX 1048Z annunciator. It looks like this. RAX 1048 TZDS has 48 LEDs on it. So that is the 48 LED adder. We can add a 24 switch adder. The 24 switch adder is the IPS 2424. The IPS 2424, which has 24 programmable switch modules on it. We can also add the HOA switch adder. The HOA switch adder has the 8 fan and damper switches on it. Looks like this. These slides are taken from the presentation you saw earlier. So this is the FDX008 with 8 HOA position switches, and that is the HOA switch adder. We can also add a graphic adder, which is a LED driver for 48 LEDs. It looks like this. And we can add a telephone page selector panel, which is a 24 button panel similar to the IPS 424, but with different functionality. This is used for paging zones, telephone zones, and for our digital messages and some other audio functions. If you're using audio, the QAZ T5302DS paging and telephone selector is what you would use for those functions. And in addition to those display adders, we have the master paging microphone, which is considered a display adder also. And if you're using audio, you would have a microphone, either a QMP 5101N or NV, depending on the horizontal or vertical mounting in which cabinet. And the other option that we have is the master telephone. Master telephone is the QMT 5302N and NV for horizontal and vertical positioned handsets. So those are the types of display adders that we can add when we go to add a display adder to a main display or a remote LCD enunciator. So I'm going to select 48 LED adder. I'm going to add one of those. So I click on add, and you can see over here now that it's added the 48 LED adder. It is in sequence on the tree following the switches that are on the main display and then the 48 LED adder. I'm also going to add a 24 switch adder, and I'm going to add an HOA switch adder. I'll close this for now. You notice that each of those items follows the last one that was added. So I had the main display, the 48 LED adder, then the 24 switch adder, and then the HOA switch adder. It's important to note that the order in which you add these puts them in this position, and these positions now represent the way that the ribbon cable connection between those display adders in the panel have to be connected. If you load this job onto a panel and you connect the displays out of sequence, in other words, not the way you have them laid out on your job here, then you will get a display adder mismatch trouble, and you'll have to correct that. And correcting it requires you to delete it and then put it back in again. So it's very important to make sure that you put these, when you do add them, that you put them in the order in which you want your panel layout to work and the way the cabling is going to work, or else you'll end up having to do one or the other. So we have a 48 LED adder, a 24 switch adder, and an HOA switch adder. And all of these say that the points on these are currently unassigned. So to enable an LED on the LED adder for function, we have to click on the type first. And so when we click on where it says unassigned, it asks us to select the type of LED we would like. And the choices are system LED, an input zone LED, an output zone LED, a zone trouble LED, node status, or CPU status LED. An example of a system LED, if I selected that, would then give me an assignment that I can select to have the LED operate on any of these types of common system conditions. If I select the type as input zone, then the LED will be driven by a zone activation. And the zone activation is based upon whether it's an alarm zone, or a supervisory zone, or a trouble zone, or a monitor zone, or a no monitor status. And we also have mixed input. I'm going to leave that as alarm status for now. If I select alarm status, we would then correlate a zone, an alarm zone, to make this light on the LED. And the way we would do that is right click, say add correlations, and it would bring up a list of the alarm zones that I have. And on this particular job, I've only got 4 alarm zones, so the only alarm that makes sense would be all of the devices that are on this one input zone that we had. So I'm going to close that for now. I could change this to a mixed input so that I could select any of the zones that I currently have. So if I select mixed input zone, I can click on Add Correlations, and now I can add any of the other zones, alarm, supervisory, trouble, or monitor if I had them. So you say, if I want to have a light for my enunciators, or sorry, if I want to have a light for my smoke detectors on the first floor, for an example, I'll just give it a tag. I would have to have a zone that's related to the first floor smoke detectors. So I'm going to go to my input zones, and I'm going to add a new zone. Alarm type, click Add, and I have this new zone. I'm going to call this smoke detectors, first floor. And first I'm going to correlate the devices to the zone. So I go to Add Correlations, and I'll find my first floor smoke detectors. There's one. That's one. I think I only have two. So we'll assign those, put those devices, the two first floor smoke detectors, into the smoke detector first floor zone. And now I'll go to my LED enunciator, and I'm going to assign or correlate that zone that I just created that has the smoke detectors in it. So if either of those two smoke detectors I added activate the zone, then it's going to activate this LED. Here's the zone down here. When that zone is active, it's going to light this LED, and because it's an alarm status assignment, the red LED will be the light that. So in this case, I've created an LED. The LED assignment is going to be one of the index numbers. So the indexes go from 0 all the way to 47. 0 is a number in the Mercom system. So the first LED is LED 0. The second LED is index 1, index 2 is a third LED. So when you're looking at your LED enunciator, you would see that the way the numbers work is it starts in the top corner here. This is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 starts here and down to 16, etc., until you get to 47 at this end. So just to go through that again, I'm going to go to my input zones. I'm going to make a new zone, and I'm going to call it, it's going to make an alarm zone, and I'm going to give this a label of water flow, first floor. I'm labeling the zone so I know what it is. I'm going to add the devices to that zone for first floor water flow right here. So I now have an input zone with the first floor water flow device in it. And I'm going to go back to my LED enunciator. I'm going to select the second LED as an input zone and alarm status. I'll tag it for reference, water flow, first floor. And I'm going to correlate this zone, or this LED, so I'm going to correlate this LED to that zone that I created, the water flow first floor. So that's how you program an LED to turn on. You need to have a zone to turn the LED on, and you need to have the devices in the zone that match. One more function that may be of note, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we have what's called an output zone type. When I select output zone, I can have an LED turn on when certain outputs have been activated. This may be useful for information for the end user. For example, if I select it as an output zone and I change the assignment to relay status, when I right click on this, I can now see the relays that are in my system, and maybe I want to have an LED that turns on that tells me that the door holders have been released. I can add that relay, so when this relay is turned on, this light on the annunciator will turn on. And I'll just give it a quick tag that says door holders released. So there's a function that you can use if you decide to assign an output zone functionality to an LED. Next item I'm going to talk about is going to be the 24 switch adder. This is 24 programmable switches that we can assign to certain functions and also provide annunciation. So if we look at the 24 switch adder, it gives me 24 switches from 0 to 23. Similar functionality, clicking on the type, I have to set the type of the switch first, and we have several types. We have common control, for an example. If I set it as a common control type, then I have all of the standard base control switches that have functions. So we could make a reset switch or an acknowledge button or a signal silence switch out of one of these buttons that are on the IPS 2424 module. I can also use the lights that are next to the switch just as status, so I can set as a system LED and again choose various internal system statuses for annunciation. I can also use the, in a similar fashion to the annunciator, I can select the type as an input zone, and it would give me the status of a zone, just like the LEDs that we looked at earlier. So alarm status, for an example, I could add correlations and pick my first floor water flow zone and use that as an enunciated point instead of using the RACS 1048. I can also use it as a bypass switch. So zone bypass switch is a common function that we do use the control button for. If I select zone bypass, it asks me to give it an assignment. I can assign what type of zones I can correlate to it, either alarm, supervisory, trouble, monitor. I can bypass signals, so I can choose signal circuits, relays, and mixed bypass allows me to choose anything and add it to the switch. So if I wanted, I'm going to use the term mixed bypass for a moment here just to give an example. So if I have it, the switch is now going to be a zone bypass switch. The assignment is a mixed bypass. If I go to add correlations, I can now choose which zones or circuits I want to bypass. So these are the alarm zones that I have. I could choose to bypass the supervisory zones, trouble zones if I had them, monitor zones if I had them. I can also choose to bypass the signal circuits or bypass relays. So I'm going to choose the elevator relays, the two primary and alternate recall relays. So when I push this button now, it's going to bypass or disable these relays from operating. And I'll give that a tag. So I know what the function of that switch is. You can do the same thing for alarm zones. So if we have an alarm bypass, I can right click on this, add correlations, and I can bypass the smoke detectors on the first floor, for an example. Since the devices, smoke detectors on the first floor are part of that zone, then I have bypassed the first floor smoke detectors. That's how to create a bypass switch. Interesting to note that on the main display, we have a section called base control and annunciation. So this is a combination of both of these functions that are shown here. We have a display that has every display normally comes with 8 control switches. So the first 8, 0 through 7. These points here are control switches. And then we also have a display that has an additional 16 LEDs. So from 8 to 23, these would be LED functions. And you would program or assign these the same as the 48 LED. Whereas these switches here, the first 8 switches, 0 through 7, would be programmed very similarly and have functionality the same as the 24 switch adder. And you can see that by going to one of the unassigned buttons on the main display, and you can select the same thing. I could create a zone bypass switch and make it a relay bypass, and just right click on it to add correlations. And I could take the fire damper relay and create a bypass to bypass damper shutdown. Oh, not enough. There we go. Bypass dampers. So I'm using switch index number 3 now as a bypass switch. Also of note, you can change the assignment of where switches are. If you don't like the reset switch, system reset button being at the number 2 index position, then you can change it. We can make it the fire drill switch, and then where the fire drill switch is, we'll make that the system reset switch, I think. Oh, there we go. So you can change the position. This is also where you would change on a multi-node system whether the switches are global or other when you have a network system, and we will get into that later. So under base control enunciation, you have the 7 index switches, and you have, if you use the one of the displays that has the 16 LEDs on it, you would have access to these 16 LEDs. Otherwise, these would not work for you. So we have a 48 LED adder as our next one on our main display. We have the 24 switch adder, and then we have the HOA switch adder. The HOA switch adder has other functionality. It is for handoff auto, and the assignments are, we can make it a common control switch. Under lamp, assignment is lamp test, an auto and manual switch. And when we make an auto manual switch, we designate whether we want the switch to be normally on or normally off. We can also assign the type as a manual enable. So if we need the switch to turn on some of the manual enable functionality that's in the system, we can assign one of these switches to act as a manual enable switch. Phone select, page select, and manual evac are the other options. Typically it's used as a fan damper switch with an auto and manual position, normally on or normally off. And this is part of more of an advanced class when we do smoke control. There is an advanced class we will be doing on smoke control in the future. So that takes care of the adding display adders. Now what I want to show you is how to add a UDACT to your system. So if I go to my panel or my node, and I right click on the node or the panel, and I can see that there's an option for adding a UDACT. When you select UDACT, it asks you to select your format. Contact ID is the preferred format. Leave the auto assign button unchecked and click on add. Now in version 12, which we're working in, version 12.2, version 12.2, and this is 22. So in version 12.2, the operation of the dialer has a new function. Over here when we select dialer, we can adjust our account settings in the normal fashion you would do for most types of dialers. The mode we want is UDACT, and we want to check this box called Advanced Addressing. And once we check the Advanced Addressing, the contact ID numbers will utilize, I'm going to go back to my loop, will utilize the primary address. I think that primary address could be the absolute address. I think it's one of these two. I'm not sure which one right now. So it's either the primary address or the absolute address. If I go to my dialer again, I select here, and I click on Advanced Contact ID Report, it will generate a report of the contact ID address numbers for the central station. So I want to save, it comes up with a dialog box and tells me to save it as either a CSV file or a TXT file. CSV files are, you can open a comma separated value file in Excel. So I'm going to save it as a comma separated value file. Yeah, and then I'll just save that on my dummy USB stick, I guess. And click on save. And now if I go to that location and open up that file, you'll be able to see what that looks like. Let me get that open. So if I open it up in Excel, it looks like this. You can see here's the node, the loop number, and it uses the ABS or absolute address and tells me that it is a contact ID reference number. These are the numbers that would report to the central station for this device. Widen those out. So this would be the report I would give to the central station, showing the contact ID address values. For example, this one is 0703B is the hexadecimal number for the heat detector at the first floor elevator machine room. Okay. That is the dialer setup. And one last item, we're going to add some conventional modules to the internal loop. So we have loop 0 and we have loop 1, which we can add conventional adder modules to. On loop 0 is where our NAC circuits appear, but I can also add a conventional module to that. So I can right click over in this area and then click on add a circuit adder, and I can choose an 8 input module, a 4 circuit NAC module, or an 8 circuit relay output module. So if I selected the relay output, click close, you can now see that I now have 8 relays available for me to program to for other functions. If I wanted a relay for door holders or for signaling some other item, I now have a relay. And that's on loop 0. On loop 1 I can do the same thing. I can add circuit adders. Let's go ahead and add an 8 input adder. And now I have 8 circuits, conventional wired class B smoke detector circuits that I can wire directly to devices. Each one of these is like an addressable point, but it's a zone like a conventional zone. So that's adding conventional circuit modules to loop 0 and loop 1, and then loop 2 has our addressable circuits on it. So those are the last of the basic items that we can work with. Anything more than this is going to require a valid security key for us to add loops or add nodes or add audio to the system. So you will have one project to do that will include some of these added display adders and conventional modules to add, and that'll be your next project. And check the description in Google Classroom and the assignment, and there will be a new project there for you to work on. All right, thanks.